Boker Tov and good morning, everybody. Shalom Ed, Shalom Warren, Shalom Rabbi Yisrael, and to everybody else that's with us live or later. It is a pleasure to study Torah with you here this morning. Okay, let's study Torah. We're learning to know God. We are covering ground in this magnificent discourse as we're learning about the reason for why God makes life difficult for us. And the answer to that is why God makes life difficult for us is because it is an opportunity to completely reinvent your existence and experience miracles. The challenge that you face is an opportunity to reach higher than you ever were before, even before your soul descended to this world. Because even before descending to this world, your soul had not had a relationship with God on an infinite level, on the level of Havaya. It was on a finite level. Chassidus often speaks about the purpose of creation, the purpose of our descent into this world in order to reach higher than ever before. The greatness, the advantage of darkness is that the light that comes out of the darkness is much greater than ordinary light. And hence, the heights reached after the struggles, after the challenges, after the tests are far higher than any other heights we've reached before. To put it in the terminology of the Maamar, of the discourse, before birth, our souls originated in a level of Elohim, which is a finite level of relating to God, where how God limits himself. But it's only through experiencing the challenges, the tests, and the struggles that we're able to experience Havaya through a very, very big pillow, a cushion, a shock absorber. The laws of nature serve as a shock absorber to prevent us from being blown away by the intensity of the infinite light of Havaya. It's hiding behind the shield, the mask of Elohim. Thus, we can stay who we are, egotistical and narcissistic, self-centered beings, without being blown away by God's infinity. When we are faced with a test, we have a choice. If we become fearful, we're connecting to Elohim, to the problem. If we express faith, we are connecting to the light, to the solution, to the essence. And by choosing the latter, we become one with God's infinite light, and we thus experience miracles. Remember, Havaya lies at the core of everything. Nothing can exist if not that it was being created ex nihilo, something from nothing, at every single moment in time, by the light and power of God's infinite energy, by Havaya. So Havaya lies at the core of everything. We just don't see Havaya because of God's masterful disguise, which is the disguise of nature, of science, of what seems to be self-perpetuating existence. How God has literally hidden himself behind repetitive patterns, which we call nature or science. Science has proven, nature shows, Mother Nature does. We talk about it like we know what we're talking about. When in reality, it's just a system of, it's just a mode. It's just a mode. It's like you have a car, you have a driver, right? You have a driver, you're sitting in a car, you're driving a car, right? Nobody in their right mind thinks that the car exists on its own. Everybody understands that there's a driver inside the car. But for somebody to say, well, cars do this or cars do that, like, okay, cars do this and that and the other, but there's a driver inside that makes all those decisions. When we talk about nature as if it's some all-powerful being, when we talk about the doctors and they say, well, the doctor only gave me 5 years to live, or the doctor said this can happen, that's like saying that the cars normally do this. Okay, so who cares what cars normally do? What about the driver inside the car? What about Havaya behind the doctor? What does he say? He can do anything. Don't get stuck in the mud. Lift yourself up higher. That's the purpose of the test. To give you the opportunity to choose left or right at what I call the T-junction between faith and fear. Faith is Havaya, fear is Elohim. Havaya lies at the core of everything. It's taken us 5,782 years to get comfortable with this concept. That's a long time. 5,000 years to get comfortable with the concept of having a relationship with infinity. But it's good that it's 5,000 years, not 50,000 years. But here we are. We're finally on youtube.com right now, /Jewish Gardens. Good morning, Marty, Elaine, and Terry. We're learning now about God's infinite light. And we're saying, you know what? We can. Yes, we can get a relationship with it. Up until now, it's been the great leaders of our people that have been able to have a relationship with God's infinity, as we'll explain in a moment. But today, it's every single one of us. And that's what this discourse is about. This discourse says that God's infinity is not only for great people and biblical characters. It's for Joe Schmo, you and me, Terry, Elaine, Marty, Ed, Warren, every one of us is supposed to have a relationship with God's infinity and to experience miracles. Yes, miracles. And just because the doctor said, so what if the doctor said? So what if the doctor said? That's just the externality. It's just a shell. It's just God's disguise. The mask said, okay, so the mask said, so what? What about the person behind the mask? Don't get stuck in the superficial perception, in the klippa. Look what lies behind the superficial perception, and there you'll find the light of infinity of Havaya. And you choose with your reaction, faith or with fear. So now what we're going to do now is that we're going to review 3 biblical figures that actually did this. They actually experienced this experience of going from Elohim to Havaya, from nature to infinity, from problem to solution, all because of their consciousness. If you happen to hear the sermon, the Shabbos and Shul, I spoke about how this idea is even expressed by cutting-edge scientific research, quantum mechanics, by Max Planck. When Max Planck, who passed away in 1947, he says, the consciousness is fundamental. It's not just like what I think means nothing. No. Consciousness changes everything. It changes the structure of subatomic energy. Energy, which is a field of infinite potentiality, actually changes under observation. It's an unbelievable idea. And hence he says the matter is a derivative of consciousness. Matter is a derivative of consciousness. What happens around you derives from your consciousness. If you choose faith or if you choose fear, makes all the difference about what the result of the hospital surgery will be. If you come in and you say, well, there's no way she's ever going to be healthy again, you're right. Or if you come in and you say, she will be healthy again because Havaya will make her healthy, then you're also right. The question is, where do you stand? Matter is a derivative of consciousness. Let's take a look at 3 biblical figures that actually pulled this off on a practical level, as explained in the discourse. If you have the book, I'm going to be reading now on page 28. Page 28. It's going to be beautiful. Nice, beautiful little journey we're going to do together. Top of page 28. To cite a classic example, when Abraham confronted the challenge presented to him by Nimrod in Ur-Kasdim. Nimrod was the king of Babylonia at that time. He wanted everyone to bow down to him. Abraham refused. Abraham was a Hebrew. The other side is the meaning of the word Hebrew. He didn't believe in what everybody else believed. So he said, fine, I'm going to throw you in the fire. What did Abraham think when he was about to be thrown in the fire? He thought he's going to die. But he wasn't afraid. Let's analyze Abraham's reaction. Let's take a look at this. So when Abraham confronted the challenge presented to him by Nimrod, this is life and death. In Ur-Kasdim and was thrown into a burning fire, he did not know that he would not be consumed by the fire. On the contrary, had he known that he would not be consumed by the fire, his unwillingness to worship the idols would not have been a challenge. Abraham, however, was not aware that a miracle would take place. Quite the contrary. He was sure that he would be consumed, for this is fire's natural property. So, whilst he thought that he's going to die, the fact is that he wasn't afraid. He wasn't afraid of the fire. Why? Let's take a look. The properties and laws of nature are a product of the divine process of self-limitation described in the first portion of this Maamar. So the laws of nature is just how God happens to choose to express himself most of the time. Indeed, the Hebrew term meaning nature, hateva, is numerically equivalent to the word Elohim. So whenever we use the word Elohim, we're talking about the way that God hides himself through the repetitive patterns of nature. Implied is that the natural tendencies existing in the world are garments and veils, stemming from the name Elohim. It's just how God hides himself. For it is the name Elohim which imparts the many different tendencies that exist in the world, establishing specific definitions for each entity, causing fire to burn, water to extinguish fire, making the nature of one warm and the other cold. So does fire have to burn and does water need to be cold and fluid? The answer is no, only according to the repetitive nature of how God chooses to express himself through nature, through Elohim. It behaves that way. Now, Abraham didn't think that God was going to change anything for him, but he wasn't afraid. He wasn't expecting a miracle, but he knew that this fire can either burn him or cannot burn him. He wasn't afraid. In contrast, from the perspective of Havaya, which is unlimited, there is no conflicting definition or difference between fire and water at all. From the perspective of Havaya, it's God can do anything. It is possible that water will not quench a fire, and that fire will not burn. As the Talmud relates, this is the story of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, a poverty-stricken Talmudic sage. He's one of our biblical precedents today. And he met his daughter one Friday night. She was crying, and he asked her, why are you crying? She said, because out of poverty, we didn't have any oil for the candles. I try to light the candles with vinegar, and I see they're about to burn out. We're not going to have light in our home Friday night. So he said to her, without getting upset, he said, he who ordered that oil will burn can order that vinegar can burn too. The same God that chooses to express himself in a way that oil burns and vinegar does not, can choose to express himself that vinegar does burn like oil. I'm not stuck in the mask of Elohim. I live in the world of Havaya. I see Havaya's infinity all the time. I don't sweat the small stuff. And that's what happened. The fire burned on the vinegar with the vinegar all night until Saturday night. From the perspective of Havaya, fire and water need not quench each other, as our sages relate, commenting on the verse, dominion and fear with him. He establishes peace on high. What does it mean he establishes peace on high? On high, in the spiritual realms, there are angels with differing tendencies. Michael is the angel of water. Gabriel is the angel of fire. And God chooses when to make peace between them, causing them not to extinguish each other. So God can choose to make fire and water work together to coexist or not, depending on his mood, on what he's in the mood of doing. If he wants to be hiding himself, or if he wants to be expressing himself. It's literally a switch, the push of a button for God, so to speak, that God can vacillate between nature or miracle, Havaya and Elohim. He can do whatever he wants. Good morning, Jay, Marty, and Stephanie. Not sure what 29 means, Marty, but okay. Good morning, Garrett. No, sorry, it's Garrett, and Stephanie. Stephanie's brother's yahrzeit is today. Bert Stolerman. May his neshama be elevated in Gan Eden. Moreover, we find that at times fire will consume water, as in the confrontation between Eliyahu, the prophet, and the prophets of the Baal. This is our third biblical precedent. Fire will consume water. So not only can God make that fire and water can coexist when he chooses to unleash the power of Havaya, like he did in the case of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, in that Friday night in Babylon when they had no money to buy vinegar, to buy oil. Obviously, they were being tested, challenged with poverty. Here, Elijah the prophet is being faced with some spiritual tests, where the vast majority of the Jewish people have become idol worshippers. And they're on a mountain in Haifa where the tiny remnant of the Jewish people are still loyal to Hashem. 99% of the people, including the king and the queen, are idolatrous or idol worshippers, and they're killing prophets of God one after the other. Elijah's life is in mortal danger in the story. And what happens, we've actually learned the story here on YouTube in our biblical history series. You can find it at youtube.com/Jewish Gardens. It's the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel. And what happens is that Elijah, they make it two altars. Whichever altar gets the fire of heaven is the one that's going to be proven as the true God. The prophets of idolatry have no fire, but the prophets, when Elijah offers the offering to Hashem, he actually digs a deep trench around the altar and he fills it up with water, just to make sure that everybody knows that there's no hanky-panky going on over here like the other guys were doing. We're trying. What happened was a fire comes out of heaven and it scorches the whole place, scorched earth. It scorches it burns the offering, the altar, and even the water in the trench is consumed. Here you see the fire burns water. Because when Havaya is unleashed, you can do whatever he wants. Now, these next words, the next 6 paragraphs are just magnificent. All of these occurrences, which reflect how nature can be transcended, have their source in the Or Ein Sof, in the infinite light, which is unlimited and which is not confined by the limits of nature at all. In contrast, the pattern of existence of the world at large depends on the definite limits established by the name Elohim. So what God can do is infinite. What he does do is that he hides himself through nature. The name Havaya is the source of the world's coming into being. Remember the doctrine of perpetual creation. Nothing can exist if not that Havaya is creating it at every single moment in time. If something exists, it means that it has God's infinite power in its essence. For an entity can only come into being through the revelation of an active force. God has to be creating it constantly. This is the doctrine of perpetual creation. In order for it to exist, if he stopped for a moment, it would revert back to its natural state of being, which is nothingness. As explained at length above within the context of the verse, Havaya is king. Nevertheless, even though everything's being created through Havaya, the manner in which the world comes into being involves the shining of the light of the name Havaya through the medium of the name Elohim. Why? Why does God hide himself? Because he wants us to exist. Remember the analogy, the fulcrum metaphor of this discourse? When the teacher teaches something profound to the student, if he ignores the limitations of the students and he reveals to them the idea the way it's in his own mind, he's going to blow them away. They won't have a clue what he's talking about. If Albert Einstein starts talking to relativity in the way he understands it to 7th graders, they'll be completely nullified. Their minds will be nothing. They won't understand a clue what he's talking about. If God was to reveal his infinity before us, we would literally melt, dissipate into his oneness. We wouldn't exist. Nevertheless, the manner in which the world comes into being involves the shining of the light of the name Havaya through the medium of the name Elohim, thus causing the infinite light to be concealed and hidden and to descend within the context of limitation. Among these limitations are the laws of nature, the different properties endowed to fire and water which extinguishes fire, and that fire burns. But when a Havaya is unleashed, then fire can burn water, and they two can coexist, whatever he wants. Back to Abraham now. Abraham, the first of our biblical precedents. Abraham did not think that the order which transcends nature would be revealed on his behalf. He didn't think that Havaya is going to be unleashed. On the contrary, he thought that the natural order would continue to prevail and that fire would consume. Nevertheless, he withstood the challenge not to separate himself from God, despite the obstacles and hindrances presented by Nimrod the king and his supporters, to have him burned to death. So Abraham didn't have a clue what was going to happen, but he knew, I fear nothing. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm never, ever afraid. A Jew is never afraid. An enlightened, conscious Jew never is afraid. And that's Abraham, a biblical precedent. I don't know what's going to happen. Think of Abraham, going to offer his son upon the altar. For 136 years, actually, he's been waiting to have a child. Right? Finally, at 99, God gives him a child. His biggest wish. And now God tells him, take your only child, and I want you to slaughter him upon the altar. What does Abraham do? He doesn't say, God, can we talk about this? He doesn't say that. He just says, God, I have no idea what you're doing, but I know that you know what you're doing. And he goes with alacrity. He wakes up early in the morning, and he's out in the road, and he goes to bind the son upon the altar. He says, God, I don't know, and I don't care, because I am committed to you. You know, and that's it. For Abraham, these were the veilings and concealments of the natural order. They did not budge him in the slightest from his resolve. On the contrary, he stood fast in the face of all these obstacles that would meant being consumed in the fiery furnace, rather than separating himself from God in the slightest. And here, the next 4 paragraphs ties it all together. Yes, the Frierdiker Rebbe Elaine is a great example. I'm not sure which specific part of the Frierdiker Rebbe's life, the previous Rebbe's life, but maybe you're talking about the sermon that I mentioned on Shabbos with a great story of the previous Rebbe completely ignoring the doctor who said to the woman that she'll never have children. And she had children. Okay, and here it is. Here he's going to really tie it together in the next few paragraphs in the most beautiful way. And a miracle was wrought for Abraham, and he was delivered. What is the nature of the sequence? How do you experience a miracle? The answer we're about to say is measure for measure. Mida keneged mida. The way you initiate is the way that God reciprocates. The upper worlds reciprocate according to the initiation of the lower worlds. When we come in with faith, no fear, we pledge allegiance to Havaya, not Elohim, then God responds by giving us Havaya miracles instead of Elohim nature. Take a look. Abraham removed all the veilings of nature. He says, I see no fear. I'm not afraid. The facts don't scare me. He removed all the veilings of nature. He says, I know that Havaya is within this problem, the enclothing and the concealment which stem from the name Elohim, and therefore the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, which is absolutely unlimited, shone forth for him. Because he, within his own consciousness, removed the veilings of nature of Elohim. He saw straight through them, windows, not walls, straight through the mask, straight through the disguise. He says, God, I know you're hiding right here. I know you're testing me, and I have nothing to be afraid of. Because in his own consciousness, he removed the veil of Elohim. Matter is a derivative of consciousness. Max Planck. The reality changed because of the way he saw it. And from the perspective of this infinite light, fire does not necessarily consume. We just explained that. For it is only within the confines of the garments of nature that fire consumes. From the perspective of God's infinite light, Havaya, this need not be so, for on this sublime level, there are no limits nor any definition at all. When in his own consciousness, Abraham rose higher, to higher consciousness where he sees the solution of the problem, faith, not fear, Havaya, not Elohim, then God reciprocates by giving him infinity. It was through withstanding a challenge that Abraham came to the revelation of this infinite light. He could never have reached this infinite light if not for the challenge. Otherwise, the conduct of the world at large would have been controlled by the revelation of the name Havaya as it passes through the medium of the name Elohim, i.e. a mere external ray from the name Havaya. When life is ordinary, when you're not being tested, you don't really have a choice to choose between Havaya or Elohim. I mean, we'll learn soon that you actually can. If you're really conscious, then you don't have to wait for a calamity in order to be able to find the power of Elohim. That's the next chapter, next step of our discourse. But at least you have to understand the foundation. The foundation is that Avram's approach is such that when given a test, he chooses either faith or fear. There's only two options. To merit the revelation of the true and infinite dimension of the name Havaya, which transcends the name Elohim, it is necessary to confront challenges as Avraham did. And by standing firm in the face of the challenges and confronting the constraints that arise because of the veiling and concealment that stem from the name of Elohim, it is possible to come to a revelation of the infinite qualities of Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, which transcends the limits of nature. Without the tests, you don't have the intensity of the light of Havaya shining. You need a big shock absorber for the intensity of that light. When you have something very fearful, very, very much making you afraid, that's what can conceal the intensity of the light of Havaya. And when you choose to overlook that fear in order to choose faith, that's it. Then you're on the path to unlocking the power of Havaya. And here's the last piece over here. It has already been explained. There were the infinite dimensions of the name Havaya to be revealed as they truly are. Without the mask of Elohim, without the medium of the name Elohim, this revelation could not be received within this world. We just explained it. I.e., there would be no possibility for the existence of entities which are limited and self-conscious. We would be completely overwhelmed. What we call in Hasidic terminology a yesh. Nobody would say that, oh, I exist independent of God. You couldn't, because God's light is shining everywhere. It's too intense. The revelation of God's light would be too intense. This can be made possible only by the name of Havaya enclothing itself in the name of Elohim, so that outwardly only an external ray of the name of Havaya is revealed, as explained above. So friends, this concludes our step today here. We are moving beautifully towards the finish line here. We're getting very, very close to the finish line, where at this point we've learned today, just to summarize, that this has already been done. It's been done by Abraham, who faced the test of life and death, being thrown into a furnace. It's been faced by Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who faced the test of poverty. And he wasn't afraid, it didn't faze him. He says, God is in charge all the time, and I'm not afraid of anything. And it was faced by Eliyahu, who was faced with a test of spiritual crisis, where he could have thought that God is dead. He could have easily thought that God is dead, because even the Jewish king and queen are murdering the prophets of God. How can God do this? This is a crisis of faith. So Avram is a crisis of life. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa is a crisis of wealth, money. And Eliyahu is a crisis of faith. Like, how can God do this? God must be checked out to sleep at the wheel. No. Elijah doesn't get fazed. He says, no. God will do whatever God wants to do, and I'm never afraid. And it's with their consciousness that they changed the reality on the ground. Every one of them experienced the desired result. Abraham survived the fire. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa had candles through the Shabbos, and Elijah the prophet was able to turn around the entirety of the Jewish people, at least for a short period of time at that time. What we're going to learn now is applying it to our own lives. In the next section, we're going to learn about our financial problems. We're going to learn that you don't need to be an Abraham in order to experience infinity. You can be a Joe Schmo, a regular nobody, nothing, regular Jew. God forbid, no Jew is a nobody. Just a regular guy or gal, right? And by the way that you react to your struggles will decide whether you're unleashing infinity or affinity. For example, on a very practical level, do you say, oh, I can't go to shul today because I have a big business deal and I have to focus on the business deal and I can't daven today? Oh, what have you shown? You've shown that money is dictated by the client or the business or the boss or whatever. But if you say, no, today I have a big business deal, therefore I'm going to shul. Now you've shown that your allegiance and your trust is not in money or the boss or the deal, but in Hashem, in Havaya. And that's where you'll be able to experience miracles. So we'll carry on with that, God willing. My next session, I'm not sure if I'm doing Tuesday and Wednesday this week. My schedule is a little bit fluid, but at least on Thursday, I'll be able to carry on. Whether I'll be here tomorrow morning, I'm not 100% sure yet. It depends on a number of factors in my life. So bear with me. Anyways, folks, thank you for joining me here this morning. It's a pleasure, an honor to study with you. And please feel free to send me your comments and reflections to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Send me an email to rabbi@jewishgardens.com. Thank you all and have a lovely day.